Let's go. I'm Mark Bentham.
I'm Katie Holloway, and you are listening to Ordinary. And today we've got a special guest, Isaac Bannister, who is our first special guest and also our producer. Hello, Isaac.
Hello, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for producing us. The podcast, not us. Do you want to
You guys
tell
don't
us?
need producing. You guys are very polished.
Oh, good.
Some days.
Yeah, nice.
Some days. We got Isaac with us because Graham is now on sabbatical writing a book. So we've got some special treats over the next few weeks, I believe.
Special treats. Isaac is our first special treat.
Special treat.
Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself, Isaac?
Okay.
I didn't prep you on that, did I?
That's all right. I think I know things about myself. Yeah, I'm Isaac. I am a member at Christ Church. So, and I've also been working as the administrator here at Christ Church for the past 3 years or so, producing this show as part of my job. But yeah, I'm a member at Christ Church. I am married to Hannah. I do music in Lion of Judah as well, which is a fun thing that we do on the side, creating Christian music. Yeah, I think that's me. I think that sums me up.
Nice. Okay, before we delve into the episode proper, which is going to be about living life as a man according to the Bible, which I don't know anything about because I'm not one. Before we delve into that, Mark, I wondered if we could ask you a quick question about the coronation that's coming up. Yes, it'll still be in the future when this is released. The whole issue about that King Charles has said that he would like to offer the general public, I think across the world, the opportunity to swear allegiance to him, which I think historically has only been a select few who were involved in the ceremony will have done that. He's opening it up to the public, but lots of people on my Twitter feed basically are really angry about this and saying, why would we want to swear allegiance to this man? But it got me thinking, as Christians, should we swear allegiance to him as the king when we're offered the opportunity to on Saturday? Or should we only swear allegiance to Jesus? What are your thoughts on that, Mark?
What do you think?
Me?
Yeah.
No, that's not how this works.
I know, but you can get us going. What do you reckon?
What do I reckon? Well, I know I was talking about it with Stuart, my husband. I thought, once a year at church, we kind of agree to submit to the authority of the pastors of the church, the elders. And I was thinking, is it in that? So I'm happy to do that in that category because I believe God has put the church elders over me with my own spiritual best interests at heart, and they are answerable to him. So is the king in that same category? That's what I was trying to work out. He's obviously put there by God's, God's control. God was sovereign over him being the sovereign. So is it the same? I don't know.
Well,
There's some thoughts.
I think you start by looking, what does the scriptures say about how we respond, how we relate to government and authority. Romans 13 tells me I submit to such authorities, unless, of course, they are, in one sense, doing that which is contrary to the scriptures and to God's purposes. So, in one sense, just reading, listening to others around on this, and John Stevens says, about, as biblical Christians, we automatically kind of, in one sense, swear allegiance to the king because that's part of what we're called to as believers, to submit to the authorities. And so there's a sense whereby I don't need to actually verbalise it on Saturday because just being a biblical believer means that I will submit to the authorities, the king in this case, as part of that governing authority that is part of the way our country is. But that submission is always on the basis that it, firstly and foremost, is, if it's not blind submission, is it? If the government upholds and does things that are contrary to that of God's purposes, my highest allegiance is to King Jesus. So he will always trump, in that sense, all other authorities when they don't align with him. So I think on one level, You can swear allegiance or not swear allegiance. But you are called to, as a believer, submit. So there is a sense you are already.
Yeah.
There you go.
Thanks, that's helpful. Okay, let's delve into today's topic then. Living as a man according to how the Bible calls us to. Just for our listeners, next week we'll do the same thing for women. So we're not just like male heavy. The girls weren't available this week. So we're starting with the men. That's the only reason. So maybe, Isaac, do you want to just start us off? What are some of the challenges, do you think, today that are a challenge for a Christian man that maybe are not challenges for a woman, maybe? So rather than challenges that are always a challenge for all believers, like thinking specifically about living out as a man, as the Bible tells us to, what are some of the big challenges there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's challenging for both men and women. I will start by saying I think the culture today is difficult, and I think it's difficult not just for Christians. I think living in Christian always brings unique difficulties. I think generally it's just hard to grow up in this society at this age. I'm not saying that to try and get any pity or anything. I just think looking at the culture and the way things are set up, I just think things are challenging at the moment. So I think there are challenges unique to being a Christian, but just from the get-go, it's challenging. And I think one of the things that's particularly hard for young men at the moment is that masculinity is being portrayed in culture as toxic. I think that's a big theme at the moment, and I think essentially for any young man growing up now, the narrative is, the thing you're being told is that being a man, or being masculine at least, is a toxic trait in society that is not good. It's fundamentally bad. And so from the get-go, if you're a man, you're being brought up told basically not to be a man, or that your masculine traits are inherently bad or evil in society. So that's a problem, I think. I think the way that masculinity has been praised in the past isn't always necessarily good, but I think damning it completely is also really bad. And I think there are problems that come out of that. And I think when culture rips down the whatever it is to be a man, I think you then have gaps come up for people to kind of fill role models that are not necessarily good influences. And I think all it takes is for them to stand up and say masculinity is good, to kind of represent men, and they will get an audience. And I think a good example of this, it's a bit cliche at the moment, but an example nonetheless, is Andrew Tate. He's one of few in culture standing up and saying, actually, masculinity is good and you should be a man. And there are some good things in what he's saying, but there are a lot of awful things too. And I think purely because he's standing up and representing masculinity or men, he's getting a following because people don't have anywhere else to go. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a long roundabout way of saying really bad role models can crop up out of the fact that masculinity is being portrayed as toxic. And when men want to cling to something and draw or inspiration or a role model from someone, it can be someone who's abusing that position.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. And Mark, as a pastor, are you seeing these kinds of issues cropping up with men, maybe younger men, but maybe across the generations? Are you seeing that kind of pattern?
I mean, I think I would agree really with what Isaac's saying. I think it's exactly the challenge right now. I think we've lost sight of what actually masculinity looks like. I think it's being confused with certain things. So I think, unless everything is... where there is difference between men and women, I think that is being labelled as dangerous and toxic. And so everything wants to be flattened out. So there's an equality, which is right. There is equality in dignity and honour and value, but there is difference. And I think our culture is trying to flatten that difference out so everything is the same. But I think we all know deep down we're not the same, that men and women are different. And and we have different strengths and roles to play, and that's okay. But I think what we're seeing, as Isaac helpfully pointed out, is that within the world, and then speaking to the church, particularly when you hold a complementarian position like we would do at Christchurch, that is where we would accept that men and women are equal in value, status, dignity, but that we have different roles to play. One of the roles that men play is they are to be, the head of families, and therefore that's reflected in the life of the church as well. That is then seen as toxic, whereas actually complementarian played out, or as it should be biblically, is actually a beautiful thing, which allows for the flourishing of both men and women, and is probably the safest place to be. Whereas I think actually what we're seeing with the flattening is not helpful, and actually is not being good at all. So we're certainly seeing that, I think, within the culture. I certainly see it as a father of 2 teenage boys, and what that looks like. And I don't think we now know quite what to do with we're trying to make, it's really interesting as a father of boys that you're trying to encourage them to be, in one sense, have energy, be, do what is right for men. But a culture is saying that actually you shouldn't be that. You shouldn't be that kind of. But actually, a teenage boy is going to be boisterous. He's going to be, not all boys. Again, this is where you don't want to get into stereotypes, but we struggle with knowing what does it look like for a teenage boy unless they particular pattern. And I think that's where we're coming unstuck as a culture. I think we think it means that you have to be this or that, and it's wider.
I'll just add as well. I think that's so true, and it's not it doesn't necessarily stop with identifying what we shouldn't be, because it's so easy to take the role models like we were talking about and say, well, clearly that's bad, but then what do you revert to? I think it's so easy not to then have a grounded biblical basis of what a man is. We kind of go back to what we think a man is culturally based on our sort of history and what a man's looked like in the past decades or whatever, instead of then going to the Bible and saying, well, this is what it should look like. I just think it's really hard to slip into like one or the other when neither necessarily actually sum up, manhood or biblical manhood.
Yeah.
And I think that's partly what is coming unstuck, because you have, teenage guys who are saying, well, actually, I don't fit the stereotype of what a man should be. And so the stereotype generally tends to be sporty, athletic, muscular, uber, protective, that kind of thing. So if you have a guy who's much softer in spirit, who doesn't enjoy sports, suddenly you're kind of struggling to go, well, are you? Then you're not a guy, And so you can see where we then flip into the whole gender issues, because now this person's going, well, actually, maybe I'm a girl, and we want to say, well, hold on a second, that's there's a spectrum of what it is to be a bloke, and some blokes are going to be, classic alpha male kind of types, and other blokes are going to be much more gentle, but all are blokes. And we're all kind of called to a certain way of behaviour, and that's going to be worked out differently according to my personality, the way the Lord has made me. But there are some biblical things that I am going to be seeking to do. However, I'm going to work that out according to my personality. Being an alpha male is not what it is about being a Bible. It's not all about toting guns and grunting and doing sport and being that kind of guy. That's where I think that's where it's unhelpful, and that's where because we've not said actually held up a range of what it is. I think that's where we're coming unstuck a little bit, and it's where people like Andrew Tate are filling the gap, because they're kind of going on that alpha male end of kind of things. And blokes are going, oh, that looks good, I want to be part of that, and I can grunt and, I can treat women badly and I can have flash cars and go down that kind of line, because that's what we're told, that's what a bloke is. But actually, that's not what a bloke is.
Yeah.
Not according to the Bible.
Yeah, that's really helpful. The stereotypes, I think, are unhelpful, specifically for these reasons. I've heard it said, I can't remember where I heard it, that actually the church is maybe playing into these stereotypes a bit in the way we're bringing up children. Like, church is really geared towards girls, like in a children's, say, a Sunday school. that you encourage to sit down nicely, do some colouring, maybe a bit of singing, and actually that for the boys it's not that helpful because they're encouraged that actually if you want to be a Christian you have to be still and quiet and enjoy colouring pictures of Noah's Ark. It's slightly off topic, but is there, what do you reckon about that? Isaac, you grew up in Sunday schools.
I don't know, that's a really good question because I don't know. I think that's potentially different because young boys are potentially into that anyway, and that's assuming that those things are feminine anyway,
sure, yeah.
when they're not necessarily. I don't think we have to go in, like Mark said, guns blazing and kind of provide this template for testosterone-filled young men.
Yeah.
I actually think that is very easily abused, like I said already. I think there are good examples of that in the church, particularly in the States, where someone is trying to come in and represent that masculine end of things, and it's not helpful. Whether or not there's a framework there which is a bit more feminine, I don't know what that even means. I don't know. What do you think, Mark?
I mean, you're not wanting to start it, but I think there is truth in that. So I think there is an element whereby the expectations of what we think boys and girls should be doing at that age is very different. So for example, when my boys were much younger, they would be wanting to run around. Now that's not them being disobedient. That was just them being young boys who had lots of energy and wanted to run around. But the girls of their similar age, some of them might want to run around, but many of them were just happy just sitting there and quietly getting on. Now, that's not stereotypes per se. That was just reality of what was. It wasn't encouraged. It was just nurtured. That's just who they were. But one looks like obedience in the church family, and one looks like disobedience. And actually, that's where it becomes unhelpful. That's where we end up kind of not really allowing for the difference. So in one sense, probably the way we do church does suit, especially in the culture with young children at times, how girls tend to be. There will be boys who enjoy that, it won't be an issue. And then you've got boys who are just boys. They're not necessarily being disobedient, sometimes they are, but not necessarily being disobedient. They just want to run, they want to play, they want to, you know what I mean? It's just difference in how you observe that in a school playground. So I think sometimes, therefore, we end up being unhelpful because of the way in which how we think what should be and shouldn't be, and therefore we're not allowing that. And I think we can therefore end up kind of not helping. Sometimes it's also over feminized. I mean, we're very grateful where we are, that there are a number of guys who are teaching in our Sunday schools and in our men who are part of our children's groups. But in lots of churches, it's all women. So that immediately tells you, young boys are being told, well, Christianity is for girls. It's subtly, and that's difficult. There's sometimes you can't do anything about it, but we do need good role models, and we need to think about what is just boys being boys and girls being girls, and what is obedience, disobedience, and how do we structure that within?
Really helpful. Okay, let's turn to what the Bible says. Not that we haven't been talking about what the Bible says, but what things does it specifically say that a man should be or do these things that are not laid out for a woman, and what things are just more this is for all Christians? So maybe pick up on the things that are specifically for men. Does one of you want to have a go at starting to unpick some of those things?
Go for it, Mark.
Go on, Mark.
Well, biblically you go back to Genesis 1 and 2, don't you?
Yeah.
That's where you start in all these kind of conversations. And immediately you see, look, men and women are made in the image of God. So both of us are reflecting the image of God and the dignity, the value, and the purpose that we are given. It then seems that and then both are called to work and tend and rule creation. So both have a role to play, but it seems that when you kind of then nurture it, there seems to be an emphasis that the men are called to work, to tend in that sense, and there's a sense of nurturing. That doesn't mean that women can't work, but it just seems to be that there tends to be along those lines. Men are called to protect probably more, women more nurture children, that kind of angles. But I think where the difference then becomes is not necessarily in character. Character, we're called to reflect Christ. We're called to reflect the image of God. The differences tend to come more in the roles that we're given. So, the roles that men are given is to lead, to be the shepherd of the family in that sense. So I think that's where you begin to see how men are beginning to work that out within households and what that looks like.
Here's a tricky thing that I think in regards to that the culture kind of poses these days. It's increasingly hard for young people to have a single earner household. And so whilst historically the church might have considered that it's the man's role to protect, provide, work, it's more or less impossible these days. So you have this kind of morphing of the genders where both the husband and wife do need to be working because they've got a mortgage to pay. It's increasingly difficult to do that on your own. And then when it comes to children, you've almost got a tricky situation where which one of you is going to raise the kids, because what if one of you is earning more? Can you take time off can the mother take time off? What do you say about that, either of you? But, how do you kind of tackle that situation politically, almost culturally?
Yeah, I'll just echo that. It's really, as a woman as well, it's really hard. I remember when I was first married, and then when I first had babies, reading all these books, and it was saying, the woman's responsibility is, to make the home, to take on the burden of this, to take on the burden of the house and the children. And of course, if she has to work, then she has to. And it made me feel quite guilty as a woman for being out at work. And also it felt like there was such a burden of responsibility on me that I had to take on the burden of the house and home and nurturing because I was a woman. But then we still need two incomes because it's 2023 and we live in Haywards Heath.
Yeah.
So Mark, as a pastor, how can you, or as the churches, how can we help men? We're looking at men today, but how can you help men in that who feel like they maybe want that response, they want to be the breadwinner, but just in this culture, it's, they can't be the only earner.
Yeah. And I think what we're beginning to highlight is how hard it is to biblically to say this is distinctly a man, because it comes down to roles rather than particular traits. But I think I think the man is called to be head of the household. So I think, does that mean that a woman cannot work? No, I don't think you see that in Scripture. But I think it does mean that ultimately the responsibility or the man should at least feel the weight more, I think, of the provision, that so his wife isn't worried about that. As in, it may be that the wife earns more money, and it may be that the bloke is the guy who's actually thinking about how we make it, how we doing this, is taking a lead in establishing that these things are provided, that we have worked that through. He's kind of just making sure. Now, we all know that this will work out differently in different households, and some wives will be much better at the finances and overseeing. That's okay, but I think it's the bloke's responsibility, the man, who's to say, as the head of the household, how are we doing this? How's this working out? And how am I going to, ensure that we are provided? That's his responsibility. I want to suggest from Scripture as part of being the head of the household, and alongside that, I think it's part of this sense when you look at marriage and the role of the man is to lay down his life for his wife, and I think therefore there's a sense of embedded in that is a sense of protection. His part of his role as a bloke is to protect, and I think that's partly why men are physically stronger as well, because it's part of what the Lord has called us to do. So therefore, again, none of these things are neat in a fallen world, but I think the man, how they do that will be different. How they work that out will be different. Their personalities, their shape, but they're primarily thinking along those kind of lines. That's part of their responsibility, which then means, you see, when you're raising young guys, you're helping them to think along those lines. You're helping them to begin to think, what would it look like to lead your family? What would it look like to truly love someone else? What would it look like to actually protect and value women rightly, and not kind of use your power, your physical power, your financial power maybe, wrongly, but in order to love them, protect them, care for them, to nurture them, to, as Christ says, present them. Now, as soon as you start talking in that language, it's very different kind of, you're kind of giving young guys, okay, here you do have a role to play. How are you going to do that? And it starts, as husbands kind of saying, actually, how you speak to your mother is important. How you love them, you're helping them to think about what it is.
Do you mean saying to sons?
Man.
Husbands saying to sons
Sorry,
how
to
you
sons.
speak to your mother?
Husbands saying to sons, how you speak to your mother is going to be important, because you're beginning to teach them how to value, care for women rightly as those who'll be called to protect, provide, care for, lay down their lives. Now, the truth is, for blokes, we all go, well, I'll happily jump, we'll take a bullet for our wives. In one sense, that's probably the easier thing to do. Is a natural response. You'll probably just do it. The harder thing is in the minutes of each day, how you're actually going to love them, giving up what you want to do to serve them, to serve your kids. And they're the examples, the models I think we need to be pursuing. That I'm not using my physical power, not that I have much these days as I get old, or my financial power, whatever it is, but actually you're using what God has given us to lead, to head, to be a man, to really care for, nurture, present our families, spiritually.
Thanks. How does that then play out in singleness? So maybe men before they're married, or ones who just don't get married, so are single for their whole lives. How can they still have that kind of leadership role or responsibility? Actually, a little segue. I've had this conversation lots with my husband, and he says I don't like the word roles. He much prefers the word responsibilities. So the responsibility of the man is this, and the responsibility of the woman is this, rather than roles, because can't remember how he said it now, but it made a lot of sense to me. I thought actually that role sounds a bit rigid, whereas responsibility could look like any number of things, but seems a bit more biblical. I
think that makes sense, because it's a calling, isn't it, on your life to I was going to say to fill a role, but one thing I would say, I just think there is we have a real shortage of good role models, male role models, I think.
Responsibility models.
I think one of the fallouts, to be honest, of the change or basically the sexual revolution and everything that's happened over the past few decades is a real problem in families. And I think sadly fathers are fewer than ever in families. And I think there's always going to be within your church, for example, children who don't have that role model directly in their lives. And I think it is, I would say, the responsibility of the men and the single men too, to be that role model. So serve in your youth group and help those people along. Those people, if they're not getting it in their home, they're going to need it somewhere. They're going to need some kind of role model. So I think that's a really important thing that any man can do in the church environment.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah, I agree. It is that, in one sense, isn't it? All men are called to be godly men, to put on the fruit of the Spirit, to live it, to demonstrate it, to be godly, to be Christ-like. The Lord then gifts us differently. So for some, he may call single men, married men to be leaders, elders within the life of the church, or leaders of a particular group. But all men are called to honour, to value, protect, in one sense, to, how we care for women. So single guys are to treat other single women as sisters. That's how Paul talks about it with Timothy. Treat them as sisters, how you care for them as a sister in the Lord. I think there's a sense of, so I think that there is a sense of just the purity aspects, just how we behave about that, how we honour, how we're just, and I think if we're, not all single guys want to be, but if single guys want to be married, then actually you start to grow to be you start to model the godliness and the disciplines that you want to be as a godly husband and father. And I think one of the ways that, as Isaac said, is it's been a role model to younger guys in the church, discipling others in that way. But being a godly man loving Jesus first and foremost is key, I think.
Yeah, great. How do you think then Christian men within the church can help each other to do this? Like, I don't know, is there much of this going on, this kind of one anothering? Maybe there is. I don't know. I'm not a man. I'm not in those circles. But what would you encourage other men, I guess, to do with each other, to encourage each other, not just kind of pastors down, but just kind of all Christians to live out those responsibilities as God calls them to in the Bible?
I was looking to Isaac to see what he was going to say.
He's got his thinking face on.
Yeah. I don't know. I think we need to encourage one another. I think there are unique challenges that come along with being a young man trying to follow Christ. And I think you can't do it in a vacuum. And I think just having brothers in Christ who you can meet with and share everything with, I think that's really important. I think that's important universally for all men. I don't think that matters whether you're married or you're a father or not. I just think it's really important for men to study together and share struggles with one another.
Yeah. Do you, Isaac, as a younger man, do you?
What are you trying to say, Katie?
Numerically, maths, Isaac is younger than you, Mark.
Yeah. Okay.
Fun fact for the listeners, when Isaac was a teenager in the teenage youth group, I was one of the leaders of it. So, Isaac even makes me feel old, and I'm terribly young.
Yeah.
Does that make me?
Terribly old.
Right. As a younger man, do you appreciate it, or would you appreciate it if an older man, not necessarily an old man, but just older, even if it was 10 years older, came and, just invested in you, even just over coffee on a Sunday to have a chat and talk about, how are you leading your wife? How are you leading your youth group? Whatever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that can be an easily missed category of people. I think people my kind of age who on the surface or to people in church, they think, oh, they're fine, they're a young man and they've got it sorted out. I think there is so much to be learned from people who are 10 years 20 years ahead of you in their walk with Jesus. And actually one of the things that I've benefited from, even just working here at Christ Church and interacting with older men on a daily basis, even those who are 40, 50 years my senior, that's a real encouragement just to see how they've gone through their lives in their walk with Jesus, see how that's shaped them. And there's obviously a lot of wisdom there. I think that's massively helpful. But yeah, if it's on a more regular basis, I can't see how that wouldn't help you, yeah, I think it's really important. Yeah.
And I guess downwards as well, like you hopefully would have the opportunity to do that to young men in their teens, to model actually this is what it looks like when you're a newlywed or about to be married or this is the challenges I'm facing in this role, not necessarily this is what it looked like, because nobody's got it perfect. I'm not saying you haven't, but and
you also don't want these people emulating you in a way. You just really want to be pointing them, don't you, to Christ. So, yeah. Were you going to say something, Mark? Sorry.
Well, no, just one of the known things, if you look at teenagers, having peers of a similar age is important, it's helpful. But often it's the guys just a bit above them that really encourage them. So I know just in my own boys' lives, they love their mates of the same age, but the guys like Isaac just above them who kind of have just spent time just talking with them. Isaac's chat with my youngest, just about similar interests and just what it is to be playing in the music in the church. That has a massive impact because they're looking up to the guys and saying, "Gosh, that's what it is." And to be a Christian, in your 20s, to be a Christian in your 30s, when they're told all the time, it's not cool to be, and you suddenly got guys just a bit above you who you respect and look up to and go, actually, no, it is okay to be a believer. It's really important. Yeah. And I know I've valued, and I can say this because he's not here today, but, Graham, he's a little bit older than me.
You calling him an older man?
He is
got to get that in there.
Old man, but the conversations where the value of when he's just asked me, how the boys are, or because you and particularly within the life of the church, not everyone's had. I had a Christian dad, but lots of guys don't have Christian fathers, and my father was a first generation believer. So he was he didn't have, 2 generations, 3 generations of Christian history where he knew what to do as a believer. So, I'm now the second generation, and there are things that, my father never did because he just wasn't even on his radar. We weren't talking about things like, family devotions or devotions, or, it wasn't even in the culture of the church back then, 20 or 30, 40 years ago. But actually talking to someone like Graham, who's just gone a bit before, and how he's done it and the conversations he's had, some of the most helpful, things that in terms of parenting have been encouraging as a father, Graham has spoken to me. That's just kind of spurred me on, kept me going. That's kind of helped you kind of just keep going with the Bible position, as it were, to not give up hope when it feels tough, to persevere, just to kind of level things out when you're over worrying, or, and actually I think that's the beauty of the church, isn't it? Is having that one anothering. So blokes, we're not very good at this. And we live in a culture where we don't like, it's very individualistic, but actually we need one another, to encourage one another, to speak one another, to pray for one another, and just to seek the wisdom of older believers, to know how to be good fathers, to know how to run the race as single men when we, of those before us who have done it, all of these things. And there's different challenges, as Isaac said, I think it's a really hard generation to grow up in as a believer. There's greater challenges than even when I was a child, today. But actually that's where we need the wisdom and help of others as well.
Yeah.
And podcasts that talk about it.
Yeah.
One other really small thing that I would add is, just on top of that, is it's really easy to underestimate the influence and the importance of just having, even if it's not a really formal structured relationship where you have a slightly older guy meeting with a younger guy on a regular basis. I think for me, the subtle impact has been from guys who are just a bit older than me, 10 years, 5 years ahead of me, who are just faithfully serving on a weekly basis. They're turning up to church and they're just doing church, and they're serving God in their actions and the way they help. I just think that is, obviously we rely on God's grace, and we want our service to him to be an outpouring of our response to Jesus. But that's going to fail sometimes because we are broken. And I think just having that example goes a long way. Seeing, it's okay for a young guy just to turn up to church, and even if you're not feeling it that week, just do it because it is useful. And you see these guys ahead of you, they just carry on doing it. That's just a positive and helpful influence on you in your walk, I think.
Yeah, great. As we finish then, how can women help men to live out as God calls you to? To maybe your wives, but maybe not even just your wives, maybe just, all women in the church, single, young, old, we're all Christians all together. We're all on the race together. We have different responsibilities, but we are called to encourage one another in different ways. As women, what can we be doing or praying to help encourage the men to live out as godly biblical men?
Well, I think if we hold to the fact that we do believe in complementarianism, and we believe in the sense of men are to be the heads of households and will be the leaders in the church, then I think actually just encouraging guys to lead at times, because we live in a culture where that's not the case. And actually that doesn't mean that a woman, there are certain areas, of course women are going to lead out, within the life of the church. But I think where we can, it's just encouraging the guys to step up, Because I think sometimes, I mean, let's be honest as well, guys are lazy. That's one of the guys will always take a step backwards on the whole. Yeah, again, not true of everyone, but generally there's a trait of blokes.
I'm not making any comments on this.
Well, I mean, I think it's just Genesis 3, isn't it? You know, Eve steps up and Adam steps back. And I think that's a reality, and that's part of the curse, is that there's a sense of women want... So everything women can do in the life of the church, it just encourages the guys to lead. You know, so if encouraging them, thanks for doing that, thanks for leading out on that, thanks for just taking the initiative there. Anything that just encourages them to do that within their role. That doesn't mean every woman should submit as if they are to their husband. That's not right. But it is that sense of just encouraging guys to be guys, rather than expecting them to. And I think sometimes it's just holding back when you want to, because guys can just be a little bit slower at times to, actually, I need to think about this, you know, holding back. Just to encourage that a bit would be one way. Praying for them to be what God has called them to be in those environments. Praying that they would be courageous and bold and, you know, gentle and kind, and nurturing the guys at all the whole spectrum. You know, it's not playing to the stereotypes, you know, affirming that the guy's got to be an alpha male, but affirming the guys who are quietly leading in different ways. I think just we can help one another in that.
Yeah, great. Do you want to add anything, Isaac?
Amen. I don't have any new insights for you.
Wonderful. All right. I think that is us. Thanks very much, Isaac, for being our first special treat of the season.
Pleasure. Thanks
special
for having
treat
me on.
Indeed.
Yeah, that was Mark's words. Listeners, I hope it was a treat. Join us next week. We'll be doing... we'll be talking, it's similar again, but living out as a godly woman. So if you're a man, please still listen, because like this week, we're going to be thinking about how we can help each other in that. But kicking off all the men, we're going to be all women next week. So that'll be fun, and we'll try and stick to time. All right, we'll see you next time.